In relation to writing about the assessment of the development of the character, you might say something like this. At the beginning of the novel, Atticus is presented as a very fair-minded character who treats his children as equals, as he attempts to raise them according to his own moral values. As I've mentioned above, there are many moments at the beginning of the novel when Atticus teaches his children a moral lesson. Essentially, he's attempting to teach them to be tolerant and empathetic. This is obvious from very early in the novel. For example, after Scout has fought with Walter Cunningham, he tells her, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Throughout his defence of Tom Robinson, Atticus remains true to his ethical belief in the legal system and continues to teach his children the limitations of having a prejudicial point of view. His summation speech clearly expresses his point of view. In this country, our courts are the great levellers, and in our courts all men are created equal. So by the end of the novel, Atticus is forced to accept that the law does not always provide justice to the innocent, and sometimes natural justice must be allowed to take its course. He's forced to question the values which he holds dear, but finds comfort in his children's understanding and empathy. Well, that'd be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? So, in addition to looking at the character, the plot, relationships, you've got to look at the symbolism of this novel. What about if you're asked a question about a novel which had a significant title, or a novel which you read in which the title had a lot of meaning, or how the title reflected the theme that was written about by the author? You'd need to talk about the symbol of the mockingbird. Now that symbol was introduced in chapter 10. It's introduced as a symbol for vulnerable outsiders. Neither Tom Robinson nor Boo Radley harm anyone. And it happens with this little vignette that Harper Lee communicates to us when Uncle Jack gives the children BB guns. Atticus said to Jem one day, I'd rather you shoot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit them, but remember it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Moody about it. Your father's right, she said. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens, don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. But this symbol takes on deeper significance in chapter 25, when Mr. Underwood writes about Tom's death in the Macomb Tribune. The mockingbird becomes central to understanding the theme of racial prejudice. Mr. Underwood likened Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children. In chapter 30, again, the symbol of the mockingbird is used to show the development in Scout's character and what she's understood from facing up to the prejudice that defines people's behaviour in this society. Atticus looked like he needed cheering up. I ran to him and hugged him and kissed him with all my might. Yes, sir, I understand, I reassured him. Mr. Tate was right. Atticus disengaged himself and looked at me. What do you mean? Well, it would be sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? Now, coming to the ending of your novel is important. And one of the questions in the sample papers asked you to list any 3 characteristics you believe are important for a good ending to a novel. So 3 characteristics might include a good ending can leave the reader guessing by leaving certain issues unresolved. A cliffhanger ending, where the reader is unsure what will happen to a character, is particularly compelling reading. A good ending may also bring a final resolution to a particular conflict which was ongoing between 2 characters. This can bring our feelings of tension and suspense to a satisfying resolution, by letting us feel that there is a clear winner and loser in the story. Or a good ending, you might say, may have the main character share an important life lesson with the reader. This may teach the reader something important about the theme of the novel, for example. Again, one of the questions you were asked in the sample papers was to assess the ending of the novel, in which case you might respond with something similar to this. When I think about the ending of the novel To Kill a Mockingbird, I think about all the dramatic events which occur after the children have been attacked by Bob Ewell in the forest on the way home from the pageant. I remembered how sickened I was when I thought that Jem might have been murdered, and how confused I was about who the strange figure might be who carried him back to the Finch family home. To say that the novel ends with tension and suspense is an understatement. I felt I'd ridden a roller coaster of emotion by the time I closed the book. However, despite all this excitement and confusion, the reason why I think the novel had a good closing was because it really described the moral life lesson which had been learned by the narrator, and clearly described the moment she went from being a child to being a grown-up. At the end of the novel, Scout compares putting Boo Radley to the senseless slaughter of songbirds. Well, it'd be like sort of like shooting a mockingbird, wouldn't it? This was a huge life lesson to Sharon. I understood that she was no longer a child and had learned the lessons of tolerance which her father had taught her all the way through the book. Atticus was right. He said one time, you never really know a man until you stand in his shoes and walk around them. Just standing on the Radley porch was enough. I, like Scout, understood the importance of empathy for other people when I read these words. So, if you're asked questions about drama, you should be able to answer questions about staging a scene, acting out a particular dramatic dialogue or monologue, and how you go about that on the extract that you're given. If you're asked about study drama or even unseen drama, you'll be asked questions about character, relationships, themes, symbolism, key dramatic scenes, and again, creative writing and functional writing based on text. So what's the smartest way to prepare the night before the exam? Well, whether you're studying To Kill a Brother, The Merchant of Venice, or Romeo and Juliet, you can focus on perhaps two key speeches from each play, which really show us the development of one of the characters, a conflict between two characters, a relationship, or the character facing up to the main theme of love or conflict in the drama. And if you focus on these two speeches, it may prepare you for more than one question in the exam. So if you're studying The Merchant of Venice, Shylock's speeches in Act 1, Scene 3 and Act 3, Scene 1 have got to be very important for your study. Signor Antonia, many a time and often the Rialto you've rated me about my money and my usances. Still have I borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. You call me misbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish gabardine, and all for use of that which is mine own. Well then, it now appears you need my help. Go to then, you come to me, you say, Shylock, we would have monies, you say so. You that did voyage your room upon my beard, and foot me as you spurn a stranger cur over the threshold. Monies is your suit. What should I say to you? Should I not say, hath a dog money? Is it possible a cur can lend 3,000 ducats? Or shall I bend low and in a bondman's key, with bated breath and whispering humbleness, say this, fair sir, you spit on me on Wednesday last, you spurned me such and such a day, another time you called me dog, and for these courtesies I'll lend you thus much monies. So we can clearly see how important this speech is to the main plot and themes of the play. We can see how Shylock has been mistreated at the hands of Antonia, the racial prejudice that is an undercurrent to this scene. Then in Act 3, Scene 1, our sympathy has to be aroused for Shylock as a modern viewer. My own flesh and blood to rebel. He had disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions? Fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge. If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? By Christian example, by revenge. The villainy you teach me I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will bear the instruction. If we look at Romeo and Juliet, one key speech has got to be the moment when Juliet decides that she's going to take the vial of potion that she's been given by Friar Lawrence and go along with his plan in order to be with her beloved husband again. My dismal scene, I needs must act alone. Come vial. What if this mixture do not work at all? Shall I be married then tomorrow morning? No, this shall forbid it. Lie thou there. What if it be a poison which the fire subtly administered to have me dead, lest in this marriage he should be dishonoured because he married me before to Romeo? I fear it is, and yet methinks it should not, for he had still been tried to holy man. How if when I am laid into the tomb I wake before the time that Romeo come to redeem me? There's a fearful point. Shall I not then be stifled in the vault to whose foul mouth no healthsome air breathes in, and there die strangled ere my Romeo comes? I fear it is, and yet methinks. The horrible conceit of death and night, together with the terror of the place, as in a vault an ancient receptacle, where for these many 100 years the bones of all my buried ancestors are packed, where bloody Tybalt, yet but green in earth, lies festering in his shroud, whereas they say at some hours in the night spirits resort, alack, alack, it is not like that I, so early waking, what with lonesome smells and shrieks like mandrakes turn out of the earth, that living mortals hearing them run mad. So we can see in that speech how Juliet is facing up to her fears of death. It's prescient as well. It reminds us of the fate of these two star-crossed lovers again through the imagery of death. We also see how she's choosing Romeo above her own loyalty to her own family. Another important dramatic dialogue you could talk about is Act 3, Scene 1, the conflict between Tybalt and Romeo. Tybalt, the fiery Tybalt, says, Romeo, the love I bear thee can afford no better term than this, thou art a villain. Tybalt, says Romeo, the reason that I have to love thee doth much excuse the appertaining race to such a greeting. Villain am I none, therefore farewell, I see thou knowest me not. Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries that thou hast done me, therefore turn and draw. I do protest I never injured thee, but love thee better than thou canst devise, till thou shalt know the reason of my love, and so, good Capulet, which name I tender as dearly as my end be satisfied. So this scene is full of dramatic irony, because we know that Romeo and Juliet have already been married, and we know the reasons why Romeo is acting, to all intents and purposes, as a coward. So when we look at the sample papers, one of the questions that came up was to choose a Shakespearean play you've studied where a character delivers a soliloquy or monologue. Name the character that delivers the soliloquy or monologue. And then to explain the importance of this in helping you to understand the character. This monologue is spoken by Shylock, the Jewish moneylender and villain of the play in Act 3, Scene 1. He speaks these words after agreeing to lend 3,000 ducats to a Christian merchant named Antonio. Shylock hates Antonio because he constantly humiliates him in public and disagrees with Shylock's means of making a living. At the beginning of the play, when Antonio first approaches Shylock to ask him for the loan, Shylock says that Antonio lends out money gratis and brings the rate of usance here with us in Venice. The fact was that in Europe in the 16th century, Jewish immigrants were treated as being inferior to Christians, and many of the professions which were open to Christians were not open to Jews. As a result, many Jewish people acted as moneylenders because it was one of the few business practices which they were legally entitled to practice. So when he hears that Antonio is struggling to find the money to repay him, Shylock takes pleasure in the man's suffering because he's been so disrespectful to Shylock in the past. In this soliloquy, Shylock lists all of the offensive things which Antonio has done to him. He had disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heeded my enemies. So in the past, the shoe has been on the other foot between these two men. When Shylock was having business difficulties, Antonio rubbed salt into his wounds and tried to isolate his Jewish rival in Venice. The only reason which Shylock can find to explain this cruel treatment is Antonio's religious prejudice against him. I am a Jew. He then expresses how painful it's been for him to be treated as being inferior to other people just because he practices a different religion. He explains how all men are created equal in the eyes of God, and such discrimination can never be justified because we're all the same. Hath not a Jew eyes, hath not a Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions. This monologue really aroused my sympathy for Shylock and made me question the injustice he experienced in the world of Venice. If we look at one of the mock papers, you're asked to comment and use one of the following elements of stage setting in producing a scene from a studied play and outline how you could use it effectively in a scene from your studied drama. So if you choose to concentrate on this speech from Act 3, Scene 1 of The Merchant of Venice, you might say that you're going to concentrate on the element of properties props and how they're used in staging this scene. I've chosen to write about the monologue spoken by Shylock, the Jewish moneylender and villain of the play in Act 3, Scene 1. He speaks these words after agreeing to lend 3,000 ducats to a Christian merchant called Antonio. Shylock hates Antonio because he constantly humiliates him in public and disagrees with Shylock's means of making a living. At the beginning of the play, when Shylock approaches when Antonio first approaches Shylock to ask him for a loan, Shylock says that Antonio lends out money gratis and brings down the rate of usance here with us in Venice. The stage properties which I would use would be an advertising billboard, an apple and a knife. I would have an advertising billboard which showed a picture of the actor playing Antonio and the slogan, "Christians borrow money for free," emblazoned across it. During the monologue, as Shylock lists all of the offensive things which Antonio has done to him, it says, "He had disgraced me and hindered me $500,000. I would have the actor playing Shylock look up scornfully at the image in the poster and turn to look at the audience for sympathy. He would peel his apple while he listed the reasons why he feels he's been wronged. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge?" When he said revenge, I would have the actor playing Shylock fling his knife at the picture of Antonio on the billboard to add dramatic irony to his words and add tension and suspense in the scene. Another example of this type of question came up in the mocks. You're asked to describe a key moment from your study drama where a character or the character is faced with either a physical or emotional challenge, and why is this key moment so important to the overall plot? If you're one of those students studying Romeo and Juliet, you might choose the same scene, Act 3, Scene 1 from that play. The key moment which I've chosen to write about from Romeo and Juliet occurs when Romeo faces both a physical and emotional challenge as he must restrain his temper and suffer humiliation at the hands of Tybalt in Act 3, Scene 1. What made this scene particularly interesting was the fact that it occurs after Romeo and Juliet have been married, and therefore everything which occurs between the two characters whom I've chosen is coloured by dramatic irony. So Romeo faces a momentous emotional challenge, as he must not let any other character know about his secret marriage to Juliet, and must appear to be a coward in front of his friends. This was really evident when Romeo pleaded with Tybalt to avoid conflict. The dramatic irony, tension and suspense reach a climax when Tybalt says to Romeo, "Boy, this shall not excuse the injuries thou hast done me, therefore turn and draw." I really expected Romeo to draw a sword. Instead, he replies in a calm and collected way, "And so, dear Capulet, whose name as I tender as dearly as my own, be satisfied." This was a massive emotional challenge for the hero. I think that the theme of conflict finds its axis in the relationship between Romeo and Tybalt. From the very first scene, I was on the edge of my seat, waiting to see if a fight would erupt between them. This added tension to the relationship and aroused my interest, and I can honestly say that I was not disappointed when this conflict reached a crescendo in Act 3, Scene 1. Now, if we look at the poetry questions that seem to come up in the exam papers, you may be asked questions about themes, sporadic devices, poems which have a sense of place, poems with a moral lesson to teach, symbolism. You might even be asked questions to talk about two poems with a similar theme, or even the work of a poet in which you'd have to refer to at least two poems. When we look at the themes that are commonly examined, you should be able to write about relationships, writing poetry, memory, childhood, war, love, nature, how time passes, and the reality of death. So if I were you the night before, I'd really focus on 7 or 8 poems that I was very familiar with, which covered a range of different themes. Digging by Seamus Heaney is a poem which you could use to look at the themes of relationship, poetry, memory, or childhood. In this poem, Heaney describes how his attention is drawn outside his bedroom window by the sound of his father digging. This creates a memory from his childhood in which he expresses his admiration for his father and grandfather as workmen. His descriptions compare the men to artisans. The poem ends with the realization that he has no spade to follow men like them. His pen becomes his tool with which he will dig through the living roots which awaken in my head. The language he uses is magnificent, invented images like the simile between my finger and my thumb. The squat pen rests snug as a gun. He uses kinesthetic imagery, which appeals to several senses at the same time, by using sibilants and onomatopoeia. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks in the gravelly ground, my father digging, and the squelch and slap of soggy peat. In Follower, Heaney again talks about relationships, childhood and memory. The first 5 stanzas are written in a tone of admiration for his father's skill as a workman, but the final stanza changes to a tone of vexation and embarrassment as the roles in the relationship has been reversed. But today is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away, he says. Again, we see the inventive use of imagery. Heaney describes his father by using several images of navigation, which become a metaphor for the limits of the father-son relationship. For example, the simile, his shoulders glowed like a full sail strung between the shafts and the furrow, and his metaphor, his eye narrowed an angle of the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. Blackberry Picking is another theme poem by Heaney, which you could use to answer several themes: childhood, memory, nature, the reality of transience in life. In this poem, Heaney describes the rapturous joy he remembers experiencing as a child when he picked blackberries. The poem celebrates the abundance of the natural world and the child's sense of adventure in collecting the treasure, namely blackberries. However, the poem ends with the child poet's tragic realization that the blackberries rot. The experience becomes mixed together with the realization that nothing lasts forever and everything in nature is subject to the laws of time. Again, Heaney employs kinesthetic imagery which appeals to more than one sense at the same time. The blackberries are personified. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot. Brilliant similes are used throughout the poem. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet like thickened wine. And on top, the big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Then we have onomatopoeia, tinkling, and the metaphor, but when the path was filled, we found a fur of rat-grey fungus glutting on our cachet. We get the sense of his disgust at realizing everything that lives must die. The Early Purges is a difficult poem to read, but it talks about childhood, memory, death, nature, and violence. Heaney describes a childhood memory from growing up in Mossbone Farm, County Derry, where he was born in 1939, and he describes his first encounter with the reality of death. Again, he uses images which appeal to several senses at the same time, and he arouses our sympathy for the drowned kittens by use of sibilance, metaphor, and simile. From the opening line of the poem, the kitten's vulnerability is emphasized by the clever use of adjectives, frail metal sound. The imagery is almost like a horrific fairy tale in stanza 2, as Heaney uses sibilance and metaphor to describe the sound of the kittens struggling to survive. Their tiny din was soon soused. They were slung on the snout of the pump and the water pumped in. He captures the reality of death in a sickening, vivid metaphor. Their 3 sogged remains turn mealy and crisp as old sung are done. Ultimately, however, the child poet realizes that death is part of the natural cycle and becomes inoculated against the sympathy for animals which he'd experienced. In preparing for this paper, you also have to be prepared for answering poems about conflict, or a poem where the poet had to overcome something. So the war poems, The Soldier and Dulce to Cormes, are very useful for answering these types of questions. Both of these poems, obviously the main theme is war. The first one, The Soldier, is written by Rupert Brooke, who died on his way to battle in 1915 from a wound which became infected. It's a pro-war poem, which reads like a piece of propaganda. It's the opposite sentiment to that expressed by Wilfred Owen in Dulce to Cormes. Rupert Brooke is saying in this poem that it is sweet and honourable to die for your country. He uses brilliant poetic devices. It's a song, a love poem to his country. And effectively it's written in a strongly patriotic tone, which is feminized and personified throughout the poem. He is a dust, rather, whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam. The poem is full of religious imagery, emphasizing how proud he is to be English, a body of England's, breathing English air, watched by the rivers, blessed by sons of home, and think this heart all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind, no less. But remember, Brooke never experienced life on the battlefield. Wilfred Owen did. And that's what makes Dulce to Cormes so much more powerful. Wilfred Owen was killed in action in 1918, and this poem describes his experience at the battlefield in stark, realistic images, which shock the reader out of the apathy and convey his moral message. It's a strong anti-war poem. He tells us, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie Dulce et decornis per patria mori. So what Owen is saying is incredibly important. He's saying that war is futile, it's pointless. He presents a detailed description of the battlefield by using striking imagery and similes. He compares the soldiers to old beggars, bent double like old beggars under sacks, coughing like hags we curse through sludge. And in that way he subverts the traditional image of the soldier as being a brave, courageous, powerful man. The tiredness of the soldiers is described in the alliteration of long consonants and metaphor. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue. In stanza 2, the direct speech really makes us wake up. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but Stillman still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or line. Owens uses these striking similes and a metaphor to describe the dying soldier exposed to mustard gas, floundering like a man in fire or line. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, I saw him, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. The onomatopoeia guttering breaks the reader's reverie as we move forward in time with the poet. And then stanza 3 accuses us of apathy, of not doing enough to stop this suffering. It has an accusatory tone, as the poet employs the personal pronoun you, like an anti-propaganda slogan. His descriptions of the dead soldier prick the reader's conscience. For example, the simile is hanging face, like a devil sick of sin. So when we look at the types of questions that have been examined, in the mock exam paper, the Examcraft mock exam paper, you're asked to write about a poem you studied which uses a metaphor or extended metaphor, explain what it is and what it means and why the poet used it. So in answering this, you might think of using digging. The poem which I've studied is entitled Digging and was written by Seamus Heaney about his memories of his father and grandfather from his time growing up on Mossbawn Farm in County Derry. He describes how his attention is drawn outside his bedroom window by the sound of his father digging. My attention was also drawn outside as the poet used alliteration to describe the sound of the digging. Under my window a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground, my father digging. This elicits memories from his childhood, in which he expresses his admiration for his father and grandfather as workmen. The sibilance of the squelching sap of soggy peat appealed to my sense of touch and hearing, and made me share in the poet's childhood experience. His descriptions compare the men to artisans. Digging becomes a metaphor for the writer delving into his memories of the past for inspiration. The poem ends with the realization that he is no spade to follow men like them. His pen becomes his tool, which he will dig through the living roots which awaken in my head. So he decides to dig with his pen and make poetry out of the memories of his childhood. Another question which came up in the mock exam paper asked you to write about a poem that deals with hardship and difficulty. Dulce et decorum est would suit this question quite well. The poem which I have chosen is Dulce et decorum est, written by a veteran soldier from World War I, Wilfred Owen, who was killed in action in 1918. He describes his experience in the battlefield in stark realistic images which shock the reader out of apathy and convey his moral message in a strong anti-war poem. It's far more graphic than Mother and Son because the images which Owen uses are horrific at times and appeal to several of my senses at the same time. Furthermore, in stanza 2, Owen uses direct speech to describe the panic which sets in as the soldiers are gassed in the battlefield. So this poem made a far greater impact upon me because unlike Mother and Son, which is written in the voice of a mother giving advice to her son, Wilfred Owen's poem feels almost like watching the events on a cinema screen because the imagery and language are so effective. Owen presents detailed descriptions of the battlefield by using striking imagery and similes, bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags we curse through sludge. The tiredness of the soldiers is described in the alliteration of long consonants and metaphor. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue. Stanza 2 contrasts with this by using verbs in direct speech, gas, gas, quick boys, and ecstasy of fumbling. Owen uses striking similes and metaphor to describe the dying soldier, floundering like a man in fire or line. The onomatopoeia, guttering, breaks the reader's sleep as we move forward in time with the poet. All of these techniques painted a vivid sense picture of what war is actually like. The final lines are written in a sarcastic and accusatory tone as Owen addresses the reader directly. My friend, you would not tell with such high jest. The children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie. Dulce et decorum est per patria mori. This made me realise just how pointless war is. The last thing that I'd be suggesting you focus on tonight before your exam is creative writing and functional writing based on text. And there are 10 texts that I'd suggest you become familiar with writing. Letters, emails, diary entries, dramatic dialogues, interviews, and descriptive passages. And from a functional writing point of view, you should be able to write the opening to speeches, short talks, newspaper reports, and factual reports. And also know the kind of language that's used in case they come up in comprehension passages. A good example of this came up in one of the exam papers. You were asked to write a letter to Shylock based upon the speech which you wrote about. So you might literally, obviously you're going to begin with this correct layout for the letter. Your address, the top right hand corner of the page, the date, and then underneath that in the left hand corner, Shylock's address. Make the date realistic. You're writing to Shylock in the late 1600s. Then you take a personal response to the content of the scene. Even if it's an extract that you've not studied and you're writing about, writing a letter to the character that you've read about in that extract. Dear Shylock, I'm writing to you to express my deepest sympathy for the unfair treatment which you've suffered due to the interference of Antonio the Christian. I must confess that I overheard the words which you spoke in the Rialto yesterday and wanted to let you know how appalled I am at the mistreatment which you and your members of your tribe continue to suffer in Venetian society due to anti-Semitism, which still informs our social policy. I was overwhelmed by sympathy when you explained how Antonio had tried to use his influence to isolate you and undermine your money-lending business in Venice. I've heard him say terribly prejudicial things against you, and I've heard him use racial slurs about you before. I've also seen him spit upon your Jewish gabardine before. The man has no respect, and I hope that his behaviour doesn't make you hate all Christians. I agree that you have every right to take what is legally entitled to you in your agreement with Antonio, and would like to offer my services as a character witness should the case go to trial. Yours sincerely, Mark Smith. Another example from a past exam paper was to write an interview of a character from a studied novel that you've named about a challenge they face and whether they resolved it for better or worse. So if you're writing an interview, you should basically write 3 questions and 3 responses. A good yardstick is to ask one question about the past, one about the present, and one about the future. Always begin with a headline for an interview. So in the case of Atticus, a man of integrity is the headline. In this interview, journalist Mary Padden talks to defence lawyer and member of the Alabama State Legislature, Atticus Finch, about the controversy surrounding the recent trial of Tom Robinson. In answering this question, write it like a dialogue. Mary: hello, Mr. Finch, welcome to America Today. It's a pleasure to be here, Mary. Please call me Atticus. Thank you, Atticus. That's most kind of you. I'd like to ask you, first of all, if I may, what made you decide to become a lawyer? Certainly. Well, I think I said this quite clearly in my summation speech at the recent trial. For me, the law has always represented the values of fairness and equality in this fine country of ours. And before the recent trial, I had great faith in this noble institution. As I said in Judge Taylor's courtroom in Macon recently, this country, our court, are great levellers, and in our courts all men are created equal. I hope that answers your question. It certainly does. Did you feel you had a fair hearing? What I've learned from Tom's recent conviction is that our society is plagued with racial prejudice, and it will be some time before that changes for the better. Do you think you made a difference in your defence of Tom Robinson? Unfortunately, Mary, I don't. The fact that a jury of his peers voted by a majority to wrongfully convict an innocent man, when in my view the evidence strongly indicated his innocence, was unjust. As I said at the time, the state has not produced one iota of medical evidence that the crime of Tom Robinson is charged with ever took place. I stand by those words today, and will continue to work for Tom's widow to see that justice is done. So, that concludes our look at the Junior Cert English exam paper. And as I said, if you focus on those 4 main elements: drama, studied and unseen; fiction, studied and unseen; poetry, studied and unseen; and writing text, both functional and creative writing, based upon what appears on the exam, you can't go too far wrong. Understanding the language that's expected in writing those kind of texts and speeches in particular is going to help you in responding should those speeches and magazine articles come up as comprehension passages in the exam paper. So I wish you the best of luck tomorrow, and hope that you found the presentation useful. Thank you.